right? Okay. So let's talk about the different categories that remote ID is going to fall under. There's category 1, 2, 3, and 4, correct?
Yep.
So category 1 is the one I think everybody's really most anticipating, where you can fly over people if you have the correct specs. Is that correct?
So there are two different portions to category 1, and I think most people don't yet really truly understand. So when we look at category 1, yes, it's the 0.55 pounds or less. Some call it the sub 250 class, right? And you have to have the ducted fans or caged fans such that it's not going to cut human skin. So that's one piece to it. Now, until we get remote ID actually in place and up and running, you can fly a category 1 drone over people, but you can't fly it in sustained flight over a crowd of people. So pass by over 1 or 2 people, no problem. Now, if you got this crowd of 500 folks standing around for a concert, you can only traverse the area, point A to point B. And when you're doing this in category 1 without remote ID, right, the participants have to be in agreement to you flying over them. So, it's a closed set kind of deal that the old 333 used to have, that said you could fly over people as long as everybody said, yep, I acknowledge that. So one of the ways that operators are getting around it right now is to say, okay, I have certain people that are staged at my event. I'm going to fly directly over them. They've given me approval to do so. They don't have to be a VO. They don't have to be participating in the operation. They can still be doing whatever. So a lot of these, it's a bowling alley and somebody's flying in and somebody's opening the door. You see that, on some of these, some bicyclist is going along and you fly over them. That bicyclist has probably signed a waiver to say, yep, I expect this thing to potentially be flying over me. So that's the pre-remote ID to sub 250 class of category 1. When we get to category 1 with remote ID, no longer are you going to have this prohibition of being able to fly over a crowd. You aren't going to have to, go through that same thing of, hey, I can only traverse. Now what you got to do is, I'm a concert promoter. I'm going to put on my ticket that, hey, we are going to be using drones at this location. So you've given notice that, hey, you can fly a drone and somebody potentially could be flown directly over. And now you're going to be able to hover over them. You're going to be able to, not just traverse, but stop, mingle, circle around that crowd, etc. So you do see a lot of that right now, where at a concert, they're flying and they're doing circles around the band and over the crowd. Yeah, that's that's not really up to par, but they get away with it anyhow, right? But when remote ID comes into place, yeah, that's going to be completely illegal. So that's category 1, and it's, like I said, it's the 2 split types of category 1: pre-remote ID and then post-remote ID.
So with the pre-remote ID right now, to fly over someone, from my understanding is it's like a Mavic Mini 2 with a Japanese battery that makes it that much lighter, to where you have prop guards on it and it's right underneath there, because it's got to be the whole system, correct?
Correct. Yep. Still got to be that entire system, and has to be under that weight, 0.55 pounds or less.
Wow. Okay, here we go. Right? It's like, okay, so for example, now if someone, what allows you to, can you fly a drone over 0.55 over somebody once remote ID comes into play here?
Yeah, so as soon as we start going up in terms of the weight scale, now we're traversing into those other classes, right? So you get a larger drone, a heavier drone, you're going to shift from that class 1 to the class 2, and then going forward depending on your weight. When you start going that route, right now the FAA is looking at airworthiness. Is this a certified airworthy system? Do you have the things on this drone that are necessary by the nature of the regulation in order to fly? So we can get into the situation of a parachute, right? They're going to start requiring parachutes for category drones to be able to fly over people. The drone itself has to be certified that it is remote ID compliant, right? So that compliance in remote ID is talking about the FAA actually investigating or inspecting the manufacturer to make sure that, yes, they're compliant as a manufacturer. They're producing a drone that has remote ID. So there's a lot of steps in there. And we saw that back in December, when we first had the initial requirement that manufacturers had to be compliant. So that was the FAA working with manufacturers and saying, show us your manufacturing facilities, show us your drones, make sure that you are on board with this having the necessary requirements. So, and when we get that, we have that compliance for the drone, we get the parachute system installed on the drone, which again is part of that manufacturing compliance. At that point, then the FAA is saying, yes, you are safe to fly over people. And that's going to extend to crowds of people. It's going to extend to traffic, etc.
So how would that work for our FPV community out there who is manufacturing their own drones at home, or having these hot rod builds where they get a bunch of different parts and put them together? And in some of these instances, they are really pushing innovation and things like that in the industry. So how are those folks going to be able to navigate this situation?
That's one of the big challenges, right? When this came out, the FPV crowd was saying, hey, wait a minute, I am not going to allow you to come inspect my build. And why would I? I'm a homegrown. I've got my own components. I'm putting things together. I think the word was Frankenstein, right? I'm making a Frankenstein drone. I'm grabbing from wherever I can to build something, and I'm innovating. How am I going to be able to reach your manufacturer type of class? And the FAA, I want to say that they dealt with this in a way, but they haven't really. In those kind of circumstances, I think it's going to be a case where you're working with the FSDO to say, hey, look, I just put this together on my kitchen table. This is what it is. You can look at the class weight. You can see I've got the parachute system. Is this okay to fly? And look for their certification of that. But the FAA really hasn't answered that. And I think that was one of the big portions of the lawsuit, right? To try to stop remote ID coming into existence. And unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. It failed.
Yeah, because I would say, the FPV community to the professional or industrial community, I would say they outnumber them maybe 10 to 1, maybe even easy. More. So you're talking about the majority not getting a solution here because as we were discussing before we started recording, I have a business where I do FPV drone races throughout the country at events. And so how are my people going to stay in compliance with all this stuff if they aren't given the proper solution? So it's going to be interesting to find out, because then you have huge events like multi-GP. You have the IO coming in this or next month, I think it is. And it's going to be interesting because you have hundreds of people, hundreds of pilots at these events. How are they going to be able to stay in compliance? compliance is going to be the question, because then does that now slow everything down for us in the drone industry?
And I'll say that I think one of the things that we are going to see is that there's going to be a real problem with compliance, right? Not from a standpoint of manufacturers, big manufacturers, DJI, Autel. You get their drones, you're automatically going to be compliant. You don't have a choice. It's already built into the system. I think there's going to be some crafty hackers that go, you know what? We're going to turn that thing off. And the real challenge, right, isn't just that you have all these FPV pilots that are going to say, I'm not putting another module and adding weight to my drone just to become remote ID compliant. You're going to have these hackers doing the same thing. And it's going to be the idea that who's going to police this stuff, right?
Right.
So at this point, the FAA has not been a very good police officer. They've not gone out and really cracked down on things, and they can't. They don't have the funding. They don't have the ability to have a FSDO on every street corner throughout every city in America. Could you do that with police officers? Police officers are going, no, I got better things to do than chase drones around. So I do think compliance for remote ID is going to be a huge problem. And this may well go with the way that CB radios did. The FCC said, hey, you can't use CB radios unless you get a license. How many people have licenses to use CBs? You don't even see it. They'll sell you a CB at Walmart, throw it in your car and use it. It doesn't make any difference to the FCC now. They tried at first. It didn't succeed. I suspect that is quite possibly the way that things are going to go with the FAA as well.
Where it's like they're almost taking a mulligan on it. They're saying, okay, you guys can have your racing and do your stuff, but if you want to scale up, then you're going to have remote ID or whatever else. Or if it's a say it's a large production, right? Like you're doing something for an NCAA tournament or event or a football game, baseball game, then you're going to have the parachute. You're going to have everything in compliance with things like that. Is that where you think it would probably end up with, like, if you want to do the big stuff, you got to have all the boxes checked off?
Yeah, I do see that. And a great example, right, is that a few years back, Congress had told the FAA, you need to change from being an educational in terms of the regulations and trying to communicate to pilots, to being an enforcer. So instead of sending out the letter, hey, please follow these regulations, now we want you to go out and actually, hey, you need to pay this penalty. We are doing an enforcement action against you. And when they made that shift, the FAA put out an advisory order to all of their FSDOs, and they said, you will go out and ramp check X amount of people every single month. Right? It was a quota, and it was telling them, you're going to go out and ramp check these drone operators so that we have data to basically go back to Congress and say, hey, look, we are doing enforcement. So what happened, right? These FSDOs, they got the advisory order. They see, oh, I got to do 20 of these a month. Where am I going to do these? I'm going to go step out to the place I know drones are operating. So I'm going to go to the most local area that I can, that is most populated by drones, and I'm going to stand there and sit there, and I know that 5 operators are going to come up in the next hour. I'll do that. And guess what? It's probably going to be the same 5 operators each day for the next 20 days. I suddenly made my quota, right? And so, I do see that where if you have a FPV event, you're going to race all these different drones, a FSDO can come in and say, all right, I got 20 drones. I'm going to inspect all of you to make sure you're all remote ID compliant. What's not going to happen, he's not going to go down to some local park and go, well, there's nobody here right now. I'll wait around for 8 hours and let's see what happens. It's just,
So like you're saying, they're gonna tag the professionals, the ones who are doing the real work, like you said. Now, what would be inside a ramp check? So what could they come and say to you if they're doing a ramp check?
Yeah, so this is the one thing that I think we need to get out to more drone operators because it is coming, and ramp checks are like a root canal, right? They're not just a dental cleaning. They're not even a cavity. This is a root canal. It is ugly business. So if you're approached by a FSDO, FAA individual, when they do a ramp check, one, they're going to ask, hey, show me your certificate. Where's your Part 107? Or if you're flying as a hobbyist, they're going to ask you for your trust certificate, right? They want to see that. They are then able to look at your drone. They can actually physically inspect your drone. So they can say, I want to see your drone. And you're going to have to hand it to them, right? And they can hold it. They could break it if they want it, to. That's
really,
yeah. It's like, wow, you really have that power. Yes, that it is allowed in the FAA to, in a ramp check, to be able to do that. They're inspecting that drone. They're probably going to ask you a lot of questions. Where's your airspace authorization? You'll have to show that if it's a controlled airspace. They will ask things like, do you have remote logs? You have your flight logs. If you do have flight logs, you must provide them. You must show them. If you don't maintain flight logs, okay, I got nothing, right? When we look at a ramp check, the first thing I say to everybody is you want to treat this just as you would a police officer and you committed a crime. Keep the mouth shut, right?
right.
Every lawyer will tell you loose lips sink ships. So whatever question they're asking, you are going to answer it, but you are going to be certain that you are answering it in the right manner. So may I see your ID? Absolutely. Here's my ID, because you're required to show it. Can I see your driver's license? Do you have to show your driver's license? You don't. You probably go, okay, yeah, I'll show you that. Can I see your phone? No. Why did you want to see my phone? Well, it's part of my ramp check. No, it's not. Right. So you need to know what you have to show and what you don't have to show, because what's going to happen when that ramp check is taking place, they're literally looking for something to tag you with, something that you've done wrong that they can then go, I'm going to enforce this.
Wow.
The other thing you need to know with a ramp check.
I was going to see if anyone in the crowd have any questions about a ramp check, an FAA drone ramp check. Ramp. So yeah, no, so they can come up to you at any time and ask you any question they want. They could even break your drone. The FAA, so they want to know who's they, Ryan?
That's a good question, right? So the they in this case is going to be either a FSDO, so any of the safety officers. It will be any of the FAA executive staff, so somebody coming from Washington, D.C. It does allow, the regulations do allow for a police officer to perform a ramp check as well. So it could be your local police officer that's performing that ramp check. So if it was, let's say, a fireman, no, they are not authorized to do a ramp check. Security guard, not authorized.
No security guards. So it has to be a police officer, FSDO officer, or FAA official, like executive official.
Yep.
Okay, so there you go. So here at the Westminster Mall, if security is trying to ramp check me, I'm telling them, no, go down to the slushy machine.
You'd say, thanks. What is it? Paul Blart, right? There's an old movie reference.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, perfect reference. So is there any other type of like regulations that are well, we went through category 1. Now explain category 2 for us, with these new RID regulations.
I think of category, well, we went through category 1, we went through category 2 as well, right? Because category 2 was above the 0.55. When you get into category 3, you're adding weight. Until you get into category 4, you're adding a lot more weight. So I would really consider most of your drones are going to operate in that category 1 or category 2 level. Unless you're going to go to a very serious, enterprise solution setup that's a big drone, I wouldn't worry about your category 3 or 4. Everything is really going to sit in that category 1 or 2.
So is 3 and 4, is that if you're getting into drone delivery?
That's a great example. Yeah. So if you're going to do this drone delivery and you've got a drone that's, weighted down and it's total 50 pounds or something, then yeah, you're going to start looking at those other categories and going, all right, I need to look at the compliance there. It's the same kind of situation. The drone has to be remote ID compliant. It's going to have manufacturer certification, and then it's going to have those safety systems. And the safety system, in this case, more often than not, is a parachute.
Right. So if it's category 3, or say you're trying to do a drone delivery for some burger place on the beach, and you're going to use an M210, a good sized drone. It can carry about 3 or 4 pounds, which is a milkshake, a burger, fries, can bring it to somebody. How is somebody going to be able to stay in compliance and doing something like that? Just something that simple.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's that simple. Because you are really, the FAA is concerned with safety. And so it's not just the safety of the airspace, but they've literally said it's safety of the persons and property on the ground. So when you're talking about that situation in M210, I certainly wouldn't want to put my fingers up to those propellers, right?
Right.
And I think that's the big concern, that if that thing is coming down on somebody, the propellers are a concern, right? That's number one. Just the sheer weight of that coming down, that's going to be a concussion, easy, right? So that's where you start getting into the situation of, is there a parachute that can support all that weight? Has it been certified to be able to support that weight? At what height do I need to fly it in order for that parachute to be to take the envelope of air to slow the weight down, such that I don't have that concussive force hitting somebody on the head? So I think there's a lot of parameters in there that you've got to do some careful consideration if you're considering a drone beach delivery of hamburger fries with something that large. I think that's where you start to see some of these drone delivery locations that are picking up drones and are picking up Walmart packages and flying them someplace. They have designated areas where that drop's going to take place. So that designated area is basically to be outside of where somebody is going to be at, unless they are picking something up after the drone has been dropped its delivery, right? And you don't typically see those drones go all the way down to the ground and drop off the package, land and drop it off. It's going to be some type of mechanism to place that on the ground and keep that airborne, such that it's not in, your height to chop your head, right?
Right. Yep.
So it's those kind of considerations that you have to make in understanding, can I have a safe delivery? Is this drone going to be such that I'm not putting people at risk or property at risk? I'm not going to drop this on a car going 55 miles an hour and go through the windshield and kill somebody.
Right. Do you guys have any questions for drone delivery and the rules and regulations? Anything about that?
Vehicles are they using? Are they using those VTOL as you're talking about?
Yeah. The question is, are they using VTOLs for those delivery services?
They are. I don't know. I can't name a specific company here in the United States that's doing so. There are quite a few abroad that are using VTOLs for that. I think they're a perfect system for it, right? Because you can take off, do some pretty decent speed when you're in the air, and still come through with a hover and drop a package, or lower a package, I should say. I think that's the real concern when we look at drone deliveries. Right now, the radius of drone deliveries is so small because you've got battery power that you're concerned with. As you add weight, you're detracting from your battery power. So you don't have a radius that's large due to the time that it's going to take for delivery and the time that you have for a battery before it's out of charge. And we don't see a whole lot of gas powered units out there. So I do see a VTOL being a little more efficient in terms of being able to, get to speed and extend your radius. I think we'll see more and more of that, especially as the batteries improve. But yeah, for the time being, that radius is so small. I don't know that I want to be in the drone delivery business. I'll be honest.
Right. Yeah. Now let's take it to, what if it's a smaller drone and you're delivering, say, a single cup, say a soda at the Michigan State game, and it's a drone that it's a novelty situation, right? And you have a drone that flies to, say they have a section of the fans that's cut off and there's a table there, and then, it brings it to the table, and then there's someone that hands the person the cup. Is that something more viable than actually delivering it to you to your seat, a hot cup of cocoa in that cold Michigan weather?
Kent just gave you all a great business concept, and I'm all in. I am all in. Yeah, no, that's a real possibility, right? A small drone delivering a very small item. And I guess the way that I would look at it is not just a cup of something or whatever, but imagine a medication, right? So you need to get an EpiPen to a location very quickly because somebody's having an allergic reaction. You need that medicine. They don't have it. You have that ability to take that in a very short period of time and deliver it in a somewhat reasonable range, right? Because it's a small item to carry, and a small drone. Many of our drones now that are, what's the Mavic 3 is 45 minutes battery power, right? So I think there's opportunity to do that. Now you're going to start to add a parachute for remote ID that takes that battery down just a little bit, right? But I think it's viable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's get to the $1 million question that everybody wants to know. Do I own the airspace over my house? Do I have eminent domain from my grass to the top to the heavens when that 747's flying over the top? Can I sue Delta for doing that?
Here comes the fun. I think most people, if you were to take a poll, would say, no, you don't own the airspace above you and you don't own anything. And that was solved back in the 1940s. They're sort of right. And I'll say sort of because they're not fully right. So indeed, back in 1940s, we had the case Cosby versus US, where Cosby sued the federal government and said, hey, look, you were flying bombers over my house at a height of sometimes as low as 83 feet that were enough to both scare my chickens and kill my chickens and destroy my ability to use my land to its full enjoyment. And the judge in that case happened to be this US Supreme Court, right? And they looked at this and they said two things. One, prior to that case, it had always been held that you as a property owner owned everything all the way up to the heavens. And the Supreme Court said, we can't have that anymore. This is the modern day society. We have aircraft that travel overhead, hot air balloons, airplanes, what have you. We even have, satellites. We cannot have a system that allows you to have ownership over the space and be able to push away all those other aircraft and things that you might not want in your owned airspace. So they put that out there to say, no, you do not own that. Instead, that becomes public domain. So nobody owns it or everybody owns it, right? But they did not put a delineation as to where that public domain started. So some people mistakenly say, well, it was 83 feet because that was the terms of the case, that planes are flying over as low as 83 feet. No, that's not it at all. The US Supreme Court did not make that delineation. So now we have to start tracking back and saying, okay, we know that some airspace is public domain, most airspace is. At what point does a landowner lose their rights to the airspace? So we go to Florida versus Riley, which the Supreme Court ruled was about 400 feet. We go to Breza versus US, that brought it down to 200 feet. And we can look at things like Giancola versus West Virginia Department of Public Safety, that brings it down to about 100 feet or so. So basically, we're still not quite sure where that delineation is as to what you actually own. But we have a better idea that, hey, probably up through 100 feet, pretty decent. Most people will say up to the highest point on your property. So if you got a tree that's 150 feet, yeah, it's probably 150 feet. You got a roof that's 80 feet up, yeah, it's probably 80 feet up. You don't have any trees. What the FAA has said is that they claim everything from the first blade of grass, the end of the first blade of grass, on up to the heavens is navigable airspace, and that they have sole jurisdiction. Now, jurisdiction and ownership are two very different things. But even when they said that, a federal judge threw shade on that, right? So we had a case, Herta versus Hogwarts, Herta being the former FAA administrator. And in that case, Hogwarts, and you may have known this, he was a guy who attached a 9mm pistol to his drone and flew it in his backyard and did some shots using a servo and being able to shoot that drone. He also did a flamethrower on his drone and cooked a turkey that way. Well, the FAA went after him and said, hey, look, you can't do that. That's in our jurisdiction, our airspace. And Hogwarts, Austin Hogwarts, his father was his attorney, and said, I've got a question. What makes you think that you can control my backyard? And the federal judge in that case threw shade at the FAA and said, hey, I know the FAA is saying they can control from the first blade of grass up, but that's a property injustice. So I don't foresee that their argument holds water. But then he backed off and he said, that's not really the point of this case, so I'm not going to rule on that question. So we never really got a full answer, but we kind of got an idea. All right, the FAA is saying one thing, it's probably not fully the case. And yet at the same token, we go to those other cases. Yeah, you've got some ownership of the airspace above. We just don't have a true delineation. What I would suggest for everybody is that at some point, a court is going to make a ruling, and they're going to have created case law that creates aerial trespass. So you do not want to be the first person to have case law created on you, because that's going to be very painful. So you probably want to stay above the highest point on over anybody's private property.
Yeah, so do you have, did anybody have any questions about flying over someone's personal property? Well, he said that's not necessarily true, that there's ownership versus jurisdiction.
So I have a question.
Okay.
So your validity of your claim doesn't depend on using the airspace. I've heard stories where people claim ownership of airspace and the claim was denied simply because they weren't actually using it. It's interesting because some people would have a claim because for whatever reason they are using that airspace and they do have a valid reason not to go to it. And I think what I'm trying to say is that law, what you have an airspace to protect is contingent on you having a valid reason to do so.
Did you get any of that, Ryan?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was not able to hear that.
Yeah. The question is it can someone claim that they are owning that they own the airspace if they're not using it? So for example, if I fly over my neighbor's backyard and he says, "Hey, you're in my space," but they're not using it, is that a valid argument against the ownership at, let's say, even the height of your roof?
Yeah, so I've heard this as a potential call out as a loophole, right? So we go back to that Cosby case, and the Cosby case said that a property owner has the rights to ownership of the airspace enough to have full personal enjoyment of that space. So folks have kind of taken that and said, well, if Joe is not out in the backyard, he's not using it, it's not to his full enjoyment if I fly over while he's not there. So I'm not invading upon his personal property. The challenge with that, right, is that are you okay with having somebody do something to your property when you're gone? So Kent, you're right there at the place, you're not at your house. So I should be able to come and just use a shovel and dig a hole in your yard, right?
Yeah, I get
even
the
if
valid
that,
argument.
right. So even if I was digging a hole in the right of way, right, that's up by the street, right? Technically, that's right of way, and yeah, it's kind of public domain property, but it's still your property. I can't just go and dig a hole there. So the same kind of thing applies, to say, hey, I'm just going to fly at 30, feet above the ground over my neighbor's property, and oh yeah, that just happens to be, 5 feet above his pool and what have you. It doesn't matter that he's not there. It's a challenge to his personal enjoyment of that property, whether he's there or not. It's still his property. He needs to have that ability. So especially, I think in this day and age, we have a lot of security cameras, right? And they're motion sensor cameras. So you go flying your drone through somebody's property, they may be getting a ping on the phone every time that you pass through, right? Is that then an interruption on their personal property? I think a judge is going to say yes.
Now, I have something to add on to that. Now, what about commercial property where it's not a personal residence, but it's commercial? So now the state is a little bit involved in there now because it's business. Is all that is it still the same with that, or is that different because it's a business now?
Yes, it's going to be the same thing. And actually, with commercial property, one of the things you see more and more of is what's called commercial rights to airspace. And this is a big deal in big cities like New York, right? You can literally buy the airspace rights of your next door neighbor. So, for instance, in New York City, there was a church, right? And it's going up, it's got a steeple, everything, but it's capped. So maybe it's only up 250 feet, and the skyscraper next door is going to have these extensions out over and this design going up. And that actually did happen, and that skyscraper construction company or the architect went next door to the church and said, are you planning to ever build here a taller structure? And they're like, no, this is it, we are capped this, we want to maintain this forever and ever. And so they said, can we as a company buy the rights to your airspace above your property? And so a sale was made to sell those airspace rights to that skyscraper. And so it does apply to commercial as much as it does a personal. It's still property rights. And I think that's one of the concerns with with folks who like do FPV and dive skyscrapers, right? At what point are you really invading that property right of that corporation? I think if you hit their window, you'd find out, right?
You'd find out about their lawyer, that's for sure.
Right.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So it sounds like the prophecy of Spaceballs has come true, and where we have to buy air, we can buy air in America. So again, everything's for sale in America, right? Even air is for sale in America.
We're getting all the
Does
movie
anyone have any
references.
questions about that? No, they're loving that. They're loving that. Like I'm loving that, right? Like, shoot, I didn't know someone could buy the airspace above your house.
Buy airspace, that's for having a better view, right? And to prevent somebody from building that structure, right?
Yes.
That's why you buy airspace.
Yeah.
Is there another reason?
Yep. I was going to say that is some of it, that you buy airspace for a better view. You make sure nobody else is going to build so that you can have that view. One of the places that was the first in Michigan to buy airspace rights was that they wanted to put a skywalk over a street, right? And you wouldn't think, well, why would you need rights to that? It's over a public street. Well, what if the public wanted to build something there, right? So they literally had to go and make a deal with the city to buy the airspace rights to build the skywalk between their two buildings.
Wow. So now that we're talking about airspace, let's talk about the most annoying airspace around TFRs. What can we tell us about TFRs? Tell us about, when they pop up, why they're popping up, and then also, is there any possible way we can take on the mouse and get rid of the permanent TFR here in Anaheim? I'll let you have the floor.
Oh, fun. Yeah. So I think one of the interesting things about TFRs, number one, there are 7 different types of TFRs. So the FAA can only issue TFRs for certain types of things. Those can be VIP movement. So when you see a presidential TFR, that's a VIP movement TFR. You can have a disaster TFR. So some of these, big tornadoes, Moore, Oklahoma got hit with a 5. A TFR got put in place because it was a disaster. You can have other things like crowding events. So they want to make sure that, you don't have 10,000 different aircraft all converge on a particular location. So we saw that with the DAPL, the Dakota pipeline protests, where they put TFRs in place. They put TFRs in place for the Ferguson, Missouri riots. They didn't want, all these aircraft just bundling up and cluttering the airspace and causing a safety concern. And stadium TFRs as well. So there's a number of different things that you look at that are all in the purview of TFRs that the FAA has to really say, all right, I can put one in place because it matches this particular criteria. Now, where we get a little bit of challenge is, and I'll take it twofold, right? The first is the stadium TFR. So the stadium TFR did not come about until post 9/11. And we're talking several years after the 9/11 events. The FAA claimed, hey, this is for safety. These are locations where 30,000 people make, conglomerate, right? They're together. This would be a really bad thing if an aircraft crashed at that location. One of the kind of curious things, right, is this already happened. So we have a TFR for every single Super Bowl, and it's 30 miles, it's ugly. And yet, did you know that an aircraft crashed at a playoff game for the NFL back in the 1970s? So the Colts, at that point, they were the Baltimore Colts. A plane, the aircraft owner was upset at his team, decided to purposefully crash his aircraft at the stadium. So he did so at the very last quarter of the game. No one was hurt, no one was killed. But there's a nice little picture of this, Cessna Piper type aircraft crashed in the stadium at Baltimore.
I thought I was a hardcore fan over here. This guy needs to be in the Football Hall of Fame for that at least.
So yeah, can you imagine? That was 30 years earlier than what we even start to see concerns about the stadium TFRs being put in place. So you kind of go, all right, is this really about safety? I question that again, because when we're looking at the stadium TFR, it's for stadiums that are 30,000 or more people, and it's only for certain events. So TFR gets issued for any regular season or playoff game of the NFL. Did you notice I didn't mention preseason? You can fly at a preseason NFL game, and it's not part of a TFR. Now, wait a minute. It's the stadium is 30,000 plus people. It's still an NFL game. So what gives? Well, there's no TV rights to a preseason game. So you kind of go, wait a minute, is this about money? The same thing, right? So if we look at Tampa Bay Devil Rays, their stadium is over 30,000 people. I want to say it's 40,000 people total. They have an average attendance to any game of somewhere under 10,000 people, right? So you're only putting 10,000 people in. The stadium does qualify because it's over 30,000. So a TFR gets implemented for every single home game there. However, if J-Lo goes into concert and packs that stadium, so you got J-Lo on screen and 40,000 screaming fans, there is no TFR for that very same location. So again, is it dollars or is it safety? I think the same can be said when you're talking the mouse. So what happened is that Disney for many, many years, especially after 9/11, had really asked, can we please get a TFR? We need a TFR for safety reasons. Now, what they were really looking for is to make sure that they didn't have banner flyers go around saying, hey, come to Nickelodeon or come to Universal Studios. We're right next door. They lobbied for years and years and years. It didn't happen until they found a particular senator who said, you know what, I can help you out. And so a TFR got put in place. And so the mouse enjoys that luxury. One of the interesting things is we fought back against this, right? Especially when Disney came out and said, we would like to have drone light shows. Now, I'm an advocate for drones. In fact, I help with a drone light show company. And I love the idea that they're going to fly drone light shows. Love the ideas they're going to fly drones, but they're in a TFR. So you literally asked for a TFR. Now you're trying to make sure that you are the only ones to fly in that TFR. That doesn't sit well with me. So when the FAA came out with a notice of proposed rulemaking, where Disney was asking for an exception for themselves, right, to be able to fly, I think I'm the only one, or I think there's like 2 or 3 total comments in that particular NPRM that said, no, don't allow it. Allow everybody to fly or allow nobody to fly, one or the other. And unfortunately, it didn't go through. So Disney still has that TFR in place. I think now we're starting to see some cracks in that system where Disney is allowing certain pilots to come in and do work for them, but they do have to be the final approver.
Right.
And that's the same with like the NFL, IndyCar, NASCAR, et cetera. So those stadium TFRs, you can get approval to fly in a TFR, but you've got to get it through multiple channels, the FAA, any security, and then the owner of that TFR, whether it's NFL, Sprint Series, NASCAR, whatever it might be.
Wow. So I think you've covered definitely all major aspects here of regulations. I mean, if someone's gonna sit and listen to this, I mean, you and I are gonna have to get some consulting service fees out of this thing, because we have definitely laid down the foundation for a couple of definite great business ideas. Does anyone here have any questions for Ryan? Ryan is, so Ryan owns a company called Capital Drones, I'm correct?
Well, yeah, so let me quick give an introduction.
Yeah,
my name
I
is
guess we should introduce him a little bit at the end
my
here.
name is Ryan Latourette, and I am the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Great Lakes Drone Company. I'm also the founding member of MCDO, which is the Michigan Coalition of Drone Operators. And I'm a big time advocate of drone operations. One of the things that I am currently mostly involved in is state preemption. I am trying diligently to lobby for each state across the nation to pass a preemption law that disallows local governments from creating or enforcing their own drone ordinance. We have that law in the state of Michigan. We've challenged it in court with MCDO and won a statewide precedent. We're trying to make that happen across the nation. So I do take on local governments across the nation, challenge them as to why they have a drone ordinance, what's their purpose, why do they feel it's needed, and then I'm also showing them, hey, your ordinance is violating state law or federal law. It's preempted. Please remove it. Please repeal it. And then, yeah, I have fun on the side with Capital Drones and flying. I fly almost every day. I try to get out quite a bit, and I've been doing it since 2013. So it's been a while.
Yeah. I mean, I think I met you back in 2016 at Interdrone. I think is when you and I first started talking. So it's been a while. Geez, that's like what, 7 years now? Oh my gosh. Where's drones gone? Interdrone's gone even. It doesn't exist anymore. So
exactly. We've outlasted them.
So, well, anybody else have any questions? I mean, if you have any questions about drone law, this is literally the guy to ask. If aviation, drones, if you have any recreational drone questions, Ryan knows all that as well.
Okay, I have a question. So, what's the like a minimum wage? What is considered to be a drone? Like for example, I remember 250 grams has always been the threshold for what the FAA considers to be drone is classified. Is it still 250? And also, can I fly a 100-gram drone in TFR? Or what's the biggest drone it's flying?
So yeah, so in terms of a drone, the FAA makes no distinction about weight. So if you've got a 1 gram drone, it's a drone. If you have a 150-pound drone, it's a drone. There's a difference between 55-pound drones and up, right? But there's no difference between 55 pounds and below. Everything's a drone. Case in point, and this is back in 2014, 2015, an attorney out of Connecticut said, hey, wait a minute, you're requiring registration on any drone that is of any weight. And so he actually sent in a request for an N number to get a drone registered that was a paper airplane with a little engine attached. And the FAA said, yes, that's a drone, and here's your N number. And so it's ridiculous, right? But yeah, it is. So anything that falls under anything that falls under 55 pounds or less must be operated by either Part 107 or the carve out of 44809. And it must be registered unless it is 0.55 pounds or less, and only if it's a recreational drone. If you're a Part 107 drone, even if it's below that, if it's that sub 250 drone, you still have to register it. It's still considered a civil aircraft.
Got it. I have a silly, annoying question, but it's an interesting question. Some places that have banned drones, for example, the Golden Gate Bridge, Kansas Bridge right now apparently. They have banned drones. You can't use drones to photograph the Golden Gate Bridge. But I have seen some clever people using kites or zip lines to photograph what looks like drone footage. Now, is there some type of like beating around the bush with like, for example, what if, I don't know, bear with me here, I had a drone that was tied to string and I was holding it like a kite. You know, like, is this violating the TFR, for example?
Yeah. So, and I know people have thought, oh yeah, if I tie it a string, then it's a tethered drone. It's not a drone anymore. It's a kite. No, the FAA still definitely says that is a drone. It's not kite. And let me go on, right? So a kite also comes under federal rules. So the FAA has kite regulations under Part 101. So they're actually fairly stringent that you can't fly a kite within 5 miles of an airport, over 150 feet in the air. You know, they get into even at night flight, there's some real hefty rules on kites. Now, what I can tell you, right? So the Golden Gate Bridge, one of the reasons that you can't photograph the Golden Gate Bridge with a drone is because you can't fly from a national park. Most of the places around the Golden Gate Bridge are national park. However, right?
Hold on.
Well, the national park, right, has a requirement that says you cannot launch, land, or operate from within our boundaries. So what's your workaround? Step outside the boundaries. As long as I'm off property outside of their lands, I can fly over because, again, FAA has jurisdiction over airspace, not the landowner. So you can step, you know, off to the sidewalk and be outside of their property and launch, land, operate from that location and fly over the national park just fine. So I think your next question is, well, how can I do that if I can't see my drone? Here's a nice piece, and this is something to prepare for. As we've come into that idea of remote ID, one of the things that Congress has absolutely expressed to the FAA is that we must be allowed to fly drones beyond visual line of sight. So the remote ID is the precursor to easing restrictions on flying within visual line of sight. So we are going to see new language come out with an NPRM that will eventually allow flight beyond line of sight. And in fact, starting tomorrow, and this is a big news hit right today, is that there are 4 companies that have an NPRM that goes into effect tomorrow, where you have 20 days to make public comment to express whether they should be allowed to be able to fly beyond line of sight or not. What kinds of restrictions should be placed upon them, or what kind of enforcements need to be eased to allow them to do such. So I would take a look at the NPRM system and be able to get your comments out there to promote flying beyond line of sight. Because when you do that, you're opening up that world of possibility that you don't need to be standing on the land of the national park to get that picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. You could be 2 miles away and fly and get that picture.
The man bets 1,000 people. He knows everything. He's busting out recreational regulations. He's hitting you with the kite regulations. I didn't even know they had kite regulations. Now I'm afraid to fly my kite near the airport. Yeah. Yeah. So, any more questions?
What's his first name again?
Ryan. His name's Ryan. Ryan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a LinkedIn or a way anyone here can get a hold of you, Ryan?
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Ryan Latourette. I'm on Facebook. You can hit me up on there. If you'd like my email, it's my last name, Latourette@comcast.net. Feel free to send me an email. You know, I try to be as responsive as I can, especially if you get in trouble with a drone, right? So if you're getting harassed by a local government, I want to know about it. You get a ticket, I want to know about it. I'll see what I can do to help.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
I can vouch for Ryan. Ever since I've known Ryan, he's the one who I reference any regulation or anything to. Before I even met Ryan, that's how I made my bones. Was I knew regulations. I studied 107, and then I met Ryan, and I was like, I don't know anything. So he's like, I know 101, I know 91, I know even hot air balloon stuff. I'm like, oh my God, there's this whole other world. And Ryan taught me how they're all linked. How 107's linked to manned aircraft, it's linked to everything. It's not its own body of work that just sits out there and, oh, we're these drone people and we're by ourselves. They interlap with one another. So really, he's a great reference. If you ever have any questions or anything, he really is kind of like, I don't know, the Oracle of Delphi almost, I guess you could say, but definitely, I mean, I wouldn't ask anybody else. Maybe, I mean, I don't know, maybe Jonathan Rupert or something like that. He's way up there.
Florida
but,
attorney, yeah.
Yeah. But besides that, I really wouldn't. If you can't get a hold of Ryan, I don't even know who to go to. Honestly, after that, it's like, just wait in line. Really, it's and Ryan does he does a bunch of stuff like he mentioned for drones as a whole, as an industry. You know, keeping away these ordinances, actually giving us the language that we actually need. We thank you again for coming, Ryan. I really appreciate it. Sorry, I got the times messed up. I know it's late out there in Michigan.
All good. And
Yeah,
you know,
I'll
I'll say that I'm constantly on different things. Tomorrow night I'll be on with Ken Herron. So if you want to catch, we're going to go through more drone regulations there. I think I'm doing a 3-hour show with him tomorrow. So we may have a lot of talk.
yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. So and again, you know, all this is building towards actually trying to build a networking conference out here in California. And obviously you're going to be on top of the list to when we can get a full facility out here and get you out here to really talk some drone regulations to some people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know,
All
what
right,
I'll
well,
say
thank
to
you.
everybody is go out and fly, have fun. You know, this is an industry that is just blossoming upon blossom. There's no place to go but up. And that's a great thing to say with drones, right? When you hit challenges, don't worry, look past. There's a future to this thing, work through those. There's plenty of business opportunities out there. Be creative, think. And you know, where you fall into trouble, I think, you know, Kent is a great resource. I'm here to help. I know plenty of others that are willing to do so as well. So, you know, we're a community and we built it that way.
Yeah. And Ryan and I, as far as drone people go, are dinosaurs. We are so old. I mean, him and I, when we were walking around, people were basically saying we were talking about witchcraft or something like that. Like, drones, what's a drone? What are you talking about? Like, and he did a lot of training with the Michigan State Police and things like that when I was doing my stuff with police and things like that as well. So again, he's a great reference. Ryan, we thank you once again. And we always appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see you next time. Thanks again, everyone. That's all. Thank Ryan.
Thank you much. We'll see ya.
All right, we'll see you. Okay.